On this episode of Inside Line, I turn my S10 into an RTI ramp and I give you everything you need to know about running 35s with aftermarket wheels and no lift on the Jeep Gladiator Rubicon. Don't lean on that. One of my favorite features of the Jeep Gladiator Rubicon is the fact that you can run a 35-inch tall tire with no lift. Now, we've proven that with the stock wheel and running a 35 by 1150 Nitto Trail Grappler. We had great luck with it. It kept it within spec for this 17 by 7.5 inch wheel, and overall it was a really good choice if anyone's looking to run a 35 and wants to keep the stock wheel. Now, I go back to the stock wheel and obviously it's no longer on my Gladiator because it's sitting next to me. Now, I originally put a 35 by 1250 Nitto Ridge Grappler just about as soon as I purchased my truck. It's just a good all-around tire. It's sort of that in-between mud terrain, in-between all-terrain. It just looks better, but you don't have all that loud roar that you might get with a more aggressive mud terrain. So, the challenge with that tire is it's only offered in a 12.5 and a 13.5 inch wide tire for the sizes that I would put underneath this Gladiator. Now, 7.5 inches wide on the 17-inch wheel isn't recommended by Nitto Tire and most tire manufacturers offering a 12.5 inch wide wheel. 7.5 inches looks pretty wide, but what ends up happening is the tire will crown at street pressure, and in order to get it to get a nice flat contact pattern, you're going to have to drop some air out of the tire. Ultimately, that's going to hurt your performance and fuel economy. Now, given I do have a 12.5 inch wide tire, what I was looking for in a wheel is something that would be at least 8.5 inches wide. The next thing I wanted to look at was the offset and the back spacing. Now, let's talk about why. Offset is a number that's represented either by a positive or negative figure that's in millimeters. Now, at a 0 offset, it's going to be aligned nearly perfectly with the fender of the vehicle. Going to a positive offset is actually going to pull the wheel inside of the Jeep. This can be an issue if you're running a larger than stock tire because you will get much closer to the suspension and frame components. Now, the next offset is considered negative. Now, this figure means the tire is going to get moved outside of the fender. Negative offset is going to be more common for truck and SUV wheels. Now, back spacing is measured in inches, and the lower the number, the more the tire and wheel package will stick outside of the vehicle. Now, from the factory, the Gladiator Rubicon wheels have around 6 inches of back spacing with a 44.45 millimeter offset. Now, while you may be tempted to go with a back spacing that is very low to offset the tire and wheel further away from the vehicle, there are some things you need to consider before doing so. When you get a wheel with 3.5 inches of back spacing, you are putting it way outside of manufacturer spec, and you are basically, if your ball joints are here, you're moving it way outside of it, and just puts a lot of leverage on those stock ball joints, puts a lot of leverage on the steering, and ultimately when you're off-road, especially in something like the Rubicon, and you have the front end locked, and you're trying to muscle the steering, you've got the tires aired down, it's just not a fun experience. The Jeep doesn't like it, it'll tire you out, so I didn't want that. So let's jump into what wheel I opted for and why. Now, there's no question there are a lot of aftermarket wheels to choose from, but there are very few that are Gladiator specific. Now, this is a 17 by 8.5 inch wide wheel from American Expedition Vehicles. It is their Pintler wheel, and it is in a matte black finish. Now, I opted for this wheel for a handful of reasons. Now, when I say it's a Gladiator specific wheel, it is designed specifically for the Gladiator and JL platform. Now, what makes a wheel designed for a platform instead of just a generic 5-on-5 bolt pattern? Well, American Expedition vehicles did a few things. Number one, these lug holes actually accept your factory lug nuts. So boom, you're already going to save a little bit of money out of the gate. And for anyone that's ever used aftermarket spline lug nuts only to see them rust or lose the key, you'll appreciate you can just use factory lug nuts. That's a big deal. You've got a big seat for them, so it's sort of a simple but very smart design feature I like. Now, what else makes this thing more Gladiator specific? Well, the fact that it's got 5.77 inches of back spacing. That means it's going to stay well tucked under the fender flare of the vehicle, and that is a big deal. Not only is that going to keep it from slinging debris all on the side of the car, which is, you know, definitely annoying after a while, but it's going to preserve that good scrub radius that the factory wheel provides. You're going to stay well within inside range of where the ball joints like to pivot, so your steering isn't going to be as heavy. Now, it being an 8.5 inch wide wheel means it's perfectly fine for my 35 by 1250 Nitto Ridge Grappler. You know, it only weighs 35 pounds, being an all aluminum construction, so I'm not really getting a big weight penalty here, so that's a really huge thing for me. Now, of course, there are other things you always want to look for a good aftermarket wheel. Maybe the most important is how well it protects the valve stem. The last thing you want is to have an exposed valve stem and that thing just get ripped on the trail. AEV does a very good job of having it recessed, so you're not going to interfere with it on the trail. It's not going to rip it out or anything like that, so that's a big deal. Now, while American Expedition Vehicles does offer a beadlock line of wheels, this is a non-beadlock wheel. For my purposes, I'm not going to be doing a ton of rock crawling. I didn't really need a beadlock, so that's why I went with non-beadlock. The other thing I really like about this wheel and sort of their back spacing option is I've seen this on some of their builds with a 37-inch tall tire, and that's a good thing. So I know that they offer a 2-inch lift with 37s for the Gladiator, and this wheel works, no rub, no issue. So if I did want to ever go up tire sizes, I'm not stuck having to buy a different wheel. This back spacing will still work, and it's perfectly fine. So to get this sort of set up all together, I went to Low Range 4x4 where I got these things mounted and balanced. We put the TPMS sensors in here, so I've got all of that stuff functioning just fine. The tire and wheel package itself balanced incredibly well. I want to say some of these were like 0 ounces, so it took very little weight. It is a very tight window of room for the stick-on weights on the inside based on how the wheel is designed. We did not run into a problem with that. It was, you know, not an issue one way or the other. Got them balanced it up. It really hasn't changed my fuel economy. I was running her averaging around 15.5, 16 before I swapped wheels with the 35-inch Ridge Grapplers, and I'm basically the same now. It did relax the tire a bit, and what I mean by that is I don't have as much crowning to it, so I've got a little bit of a flatter pattern at highway air pressure, which is really good. Did not seem to change the handling or feel of the vehicle one way or the other, which is a good thing. Again, it sticks it inside of the wheel well enough to where I'm not getting that huge sling of dirt and mud all the time. Cosmetically, I like that. I like how it's just about perfect with the fender line. You just got a little bit of tire sticking out, so kind of gives it a slightly more aggressive look, but you're not getting those big tread blocks where it's slinging stuff all the time. Now, last time I showed you 35s and no lift, I had the advantage of going to an RTI ramp. Didn't have one at the house, so I make do with the S10 here on 40s. And what I want to show you is, just like I found with the other 35s and no lift, you still have room. It's not rubbing. We're completely bumped out right here. There are some spots on the inside of this front bumper. I don't have the optional metal one, I just have the factory plastic one. And this area gets a little close off-road. I believe I've probably hit it right there. Not an issue, not enough rubbing or anything where I'm like, I need a new front bumper. In the back, again, plenty of room. I can run my hand all throughout here. The back spacing, again, we've got 5.77 inches, so it's tucked in there really well, and I think that helps kind of keep it away from where the fender starts to sort of come down here. So no issue there. If you're curious just how much this thing is flexed, the rear tire is actually off the ground, so I would say I'm probably more than I should be with an RTI ramp, but you know, that's how it goes. I've got it locked, the sway bar is disconnected, and as you can see, it's definitely tucked into the wheel well very nicely. I mean, we're just barely touching some plastic in here, but not enough that I would warrant, you know, swapping out the fenders or doing any modification. For the type of wheeling that I do, this has been perfectly fine. You know, if you're not going to be doing a ton of off-roading, you're never going to have an issue at all. For the little bit of wheeling that I've been doing with it, with the sway bar disconnected, haven't had a single problem. Hasn't really changed much over the stock configuration or where I had the stock wheels in 35. So that's about the best RTI I can do for right now, but as you can see, not really having any rubbing issues, nothing to worry about that much. Also, worth mentioning, while I did get a full-size spare for the rear, spare wheel, I'm keeping it on the stock wheel for right now to keep it kind of tucked up. I don't want to tear up the other wheel, and I'll probably, I don't know, I'm eyeing some aftermarket mounts right now, but 35 fits back there, no problem. You still have a little bit of room. I think you could run a 37 without a lot of issue. Now, if you are moving up to a 35 for the first time, I highly recommend getting some sort of module or programmer that will allow you to input this new tire size into the Jeep. I'm using one from Z Automotive. It's called a Taser Mini. It's super easy to work with, and it allows me to calibrate properly for the tire size. This not only allows my 8-speed to shift a little bit more easily and get the shift points correct, but it gets my speedometer right where it needs to be. Now, I get, at the end of the day, wheel choice or wheel upgrades a lot of times will come down to cosmetics. I get that, but I think it's worth noting that there is a reason that from the factory most wheels have a very numerically high amount of backspacing. The whole idea is to sort of preserve the ball joints in your front end components. Now, moving to a taller and wider tire, yes, you will need to move the tire outside of those factory specs just a little bit. Now, one of the things about the Rubicon that is a little different than other Gladiators that's worth keeping in mind, Rubicon axles are like max toe axles on the Gladiator in that they're a little bit wider than your Overland and Sport. So that's something to keep in mind when factoring all of this backspacing in. Now, I do have some more upgrades coming to this Gladiator, and we've got some other Gladiators that we're going to be working on as well. So we hope you like, subscribe, do all that good jazz. If you have any questions for me, you can find me at Ali Mansour Editor on Instagram. And until next time, we hope you guys are staying safe out there, and hope to see you on the trail sometime soon.